Welcome to the Life Transform podcast. I'm Simcha.
And I'm Sarah, and we are here chatting, sharing real life, real stories,
Deep truths, all about living a life transformed.
It's all about how God impacts our life and how we're changed and how our life becomes a significant impact in the lives of other people.
We're going to be here every week for this first season.
So make sure that you subscribe and join the journey.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Life Transformed. I'm here, Simcha, with Sarah.
Hello.
We are coming at you from our awesome office.
Speaking of our awesome office, let's talk about shopping at Ikea, shall
we? Because who can't identify with that?
I mean, transformational experience. Ta-dum. Not. I think in general, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I don't normally have meltdowns. In general,
Ikea
in life,
induces them.
I'm fairly together, but IKEA, it's a great place. I mean, we have our whole house here, our worship house, our office that we're sitting in here, a lot of trips to IKEA, but and it's incredible. It's actually a massive thing in Israel. We have a ton of IKEAs per capita, probably one of the highest percentages outside of Europe. I don't know why IKEA is such a big thing. You go to IKEA, you see all these great things. They've laid it out correctly. They have it all. My meltdown issue comes at that point at the end where you have to go and pull all the stuff off the shelves.
Gosh.
And when we were shopping for the worship house, for the ministry house here, we had long list of things that we needed to get.
We killed it.
I mean,
we bought the whole shop.
Basically, literally. I think it took several truckloads to fill this place.
It was the moment where you're not allowed to go out the door with more than one trolley, but you have 6. And the man is like, but where's the receipt for the other 5 trolleys? And you're like, it's all on one receipt. And you have to go out and then back in, but where's the receipt? And I'm like, I showed you the receipt, but where's the stuff? And I'm like, it's on 6 carts. Oh, trauma. We haven't been back since.
No. I literally,
we're still wounded.
I'm recovering at the moment from this. So I haven't veered in. But I mean, there's like always things that I need and I want. So I'm always like,
But on
definitely
the flip side,
can we just talk about the food shop in IKEA? Because that's incredible.
Really? Okay.
It always goes back to that. What's the flip side?
Well, the food in IKEA, I feel like it's better outside of Israel where it's not trying to be kosher.
No, the food shop, like the chocolate, the coffee.
The out, you've paid and then the food. Yes, that's definitely better. No, the flip side is the Aladdin's Cave. That is the Druze villages here, which we went on a very fun exploration date for. We went to, we were done with IKEA. We were so done. We couldn't find what we needed. We couldn't find what we wanted. So we thought we'd go and explore in the Druze. Now the Druze villages are much cheaper, often nicer, slightly different style. But we found this one shop that we went in and we're like, oh, this is nice. Found they didn't have 2 of anything and we needed like a pair of chairs and set for the table and for the office and they were like, oh, we have 6 floors. And we were like, how have you got 6? It's like a tiny little
cave that just kept going up and up, higher and higher.
And every floor,
you couldn't move in there.
Full, like
to the
overflowing with chairs.
Yeah.
And they were all really nice. Like the interior
really
designer in me was like, this could be, you need an IKEA specialist to come in
it's
here and show you how to lay this out.
So all we need is to marry the Druze village and IKEA and that would be like the perfect world.
Yeah, that's a wasted opportunity. I feel like they just, need help.
That somehow ties into our topic today, doesn't it?
Because identity.
Yeah.
And I feel that the Druze village and the IKEA
they need to
very
merge
clear identities.
Yeah. Well, so this is a great topic to talk about because, a lot of us, we have ideas about our identity. Some of us, we don't know yet, what our godly identity is. I think that's a big one to understand our godly identity.
I think my favorite kind of person is the person who decides what their identity is regardless of anyone else's or God's identity of them.
In terms of when we're talking about identity, means what we identify with, how we identify, in terms of our calling, in terms of God's perspective on who we are and what our identity is. Because this, again, is very connected to the things we were talking about in the previous podcast, to do with a consecrated life and a holy life and a pure heart. Because if our identity isn't based in the right places, then how are we going to live from a godly place? The first thing I would say for people, it's an interesting, I've heard so many different things about this idea of what our identity is, okay, in God. It comes down to this idea of our calling, what we identify with, right? What defines us? Identity is really, what defines us. So our identity is in God, but what does that actually look like? And I am one of these people who I didn't know who I was, quote unquote, what I was called to do or be, or who I was called to be for so many years. And it sounds funny, and it's ridiculous, but I remember, when people knew what they wanted at a young age, I used to envy that. I'm like, well, I don't know, what it is. And so my response to that was really to build my own identity. Right. I went out and I carved out for myself a life, a path, what my identity was tied up with, which was, my work, my position, who I was, what the work I was doing, how effective I was, how efficient I was. These things were making up my identity. Mm-hmm. And if you ask me, for the longest of time, well, what has God called you to? I didn't actually know, until long past the due date that I should have known. And so for some people, this is not something that's easy to identify or to define. And so they're walking around, not knowing. Some people know. And great, you're set on that trajectory much younger, much earlier, and you can go far places, and that's incredible. But for me, it took me a long time. And what changed for me, how I gained that understanding, was from this moment. I think we spoke about it in probably the first episode on this podcast about, asking God that question. So when you look at me, what do I look like? When I was done running the course of my own identity, I finally said to God, you know what? I'd like to know what you see when you look at me. What do I look like? What is my identity in you? And when I was able to reach that moment, God broke through in my life. It was so significant. One of the most significant moments of my life was when God showed me what I looked like when he looked at me and what his plan was for my life. And he spoke to me about it. And that transformed my life absolutely, hands down, beyond accepting Christ, Yeshua, Jesus into my life. That was the most transformational moment, was when I gained an eternal perspective over my life.
I think that's really, really key. I think it's understanding, God's perspective on who we are. It can sometimes fly in the face of what we've assumed. I think I suffered for years assuming this equals that. And, maybe you're like me. Maybe you can do several things. I can do music. I have made music. I studied music at university. I was trained as a teacher of creative arts. Therefore, I am this. And one of the biggest assumptions I made for years and years and years was that I was called to be a worship leader. And that's not to say that I don't lead worship or I shouldn't lead worship. But I think I put a calling on myself and an identity on myself because I assumed I can do music. I'm trained in music. I'm a believer. Therefore, I am supposed to be a worship leader. And it was only in a moment, it was actually very funny. I was at my husband's, I was at a retreat for his staff, and we had a whole weekend away. And the woman who was hosting us kept introducing me to everybody in the room as a worship leader. And it really wound me up. And I was getting angrier with this woman, poor woman, over like, I was just getting more and more angry with her. She was introducing me to all these people. Oh, this is a worship leader. This is a worship leader. And I was like, I'm not. And I got so angry with her. I had to actually go away from her and hide in the room and be like, God, what is going on with me? Why am I reacting to this label that she's put on me? Like, why is this bothering me so much? And it was actually the most releasing moment, because I suddenly realized this is not who God's made me to be. Just because he's given me music and just because I've studied it and I can write a song and these things are able to be done doesn't mean that my identity and my calling are for that to be the case. And it was actually a really amazing moment for me, because it totally released me of all the expectation of being a worship leader. And I'd put that on myself. God had never said to me, you shall be a worship leader, like he has to you, which you have a very clear call, which I've always been very jealous of, because it's very clear and it's very like one thing, do this, and you've killed it. But for me, it was not like that. And I had made all these assumptions of all these different things. And to have that one moment where it was like, it's not this, for me was really releasing. And it was like, okay, it's not that I will never lead worship, because I do enjoy it. And it's not that it's wrong for me to lead worship. It's just that it's not my identity and life calling for that to be my offering to God every day.
I think that's really important, because if you don't know Simcha, you don't know that she really is talented in so many things. She can do literally all things.
Not true.
Then she's married to a guy who can do even more of all things. So they're a fairly insane couple. But for people who are good at a lot of things, it's actually hard to land on that thing. Okay, what am I supposed to do? And I think that as I look at your life, you've gained that place of understanding that it is your godly identity to impact people in all these different areas.
Yeah.
And that's actually God's plan. And so instead of striving for this one thing, for this one area of focus, and we love focus, right? We're people, we love to focus. We love to be able to be dedicated to something. It helps us to excel. When you say, jack of all trades and master of none, right? You want to be master of something.
Yeah.
But really with God, we just want to be master of life with God. We want to be a master of the place where our identity in God is a place of blessing for other people, and so in your life, you've found a way to incorporate so many different parts, so many different pieces that they all function in the same way, which is, being a blessing, being a place of blessing for other people. That's ultimately our whole goal on Ascend. The entire idea of this ministry, of everything that we do, of everyone on our team, is to make a space and a place for people to meet with God, in any way that we can give, to help people to live this life with the Lord is our joy. Our great joy is to see lives transformed, to see people whose lives are changing, to be more in the image of God, and to then go forth and bear fruit in their life. Yeah. So really the point of this question of identity is aligning ourselves with God in every way and in everything. And when we are able to do that, and we're not holding on to things that are pulling us back or pulling us out of that place, agreeing with places that are not godly in our lives, pull us away from that identity with God.
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest questions that I find comes up on my track on Ascend, in the creative track. We have all these incredibly talented people. You have, your photographers and your potters and your sculptors and your artists and painters and dancers and videographers and writers and all these different incredible creative gifts coming together. And one of the first things that we have to punch through the wall of is, this is not my identity. Like, they sit there and the first thing they'll say is, I'm a photographer, I'm a writer, I'm a painter, I'm a dancer. And the amount of pressure that puts on you to perform in your gift, because it's it defines who you are. It's not actually how God ever created that to be. These gifts are tools. They are in your toolbox. He's given you, like David had his slingshot. He wasn't defined as a sling boy. What would that even be? A
sling bearer,
a slingshotter. I don't know. That wasn't his identity. We don't even have a word for it. Clearly isn't who he was, describing himself to be. He was David, and he had in his toolbox a slingshot and pebbles, and he practiced that skill. So when the time came that God called him up, he, as a person who had developed courage, who had developed discernment, who had developed the fear of God to the point where he couldn't deal with Goliath's defiance, he was ready with his skill. That slingshot did not define who he was. Everything in his character did. So that tool was ready when it was necessary to use. And I think we often flip it all the other way around, and our skill and our talent and our gift becomes who we are, and it defines who we are. And that just puts such pressure on us to perform in that area that it's actually unnatural.
So good. I think also about people who have taken on a false identity, through their childhood, through past, through history, and are carrying this instead of, letting God shine that light on their life. And so much of their lives are being defined by an identity that is false. That's not at all who God made them to be. That's not at all who they are. And some people, I'm thinking about a particular gal that I've interacted with, her mother was very, very instrumental in defining her identity in a very, very negative way. And my heart broke to see her, and I really worked with her on this idea of freedom, because when we assume an identity that is not God's identity in our lives, it binds us.
Yeah.
It leads to a place of barrenness in our life.
Yeah.
And so this is why this idea or this question of identity is so, so important. This poor gal was just fed all these horrible lies by her mother, and she believed them to her inner core.
Yeah.
She truly believed them. She knew it was wrong. She knew what her mom did was evil, but she was not able to be free to see in her own power, in her own strength, who she was, who God said she was, and operate from that identity. So really establishing our identity with God, in God, is a key, structural key to living this transformed life.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as you were saying that, the thing that occurs to me is that, believers who really know what their identity is probably one of the biggest threats to the kingdom of darkness. And actually this process of discovering and holding that ground of your true identity is gonna be opposed. And I think this is just coming to me now, like one of the biggest ways the enemy can do that is through regret. He can that's such an easy stumbling block. You can be happily plodding through your day, doing brilliant Christian things, ministry life. Here we go. I'm doing it, slaying the Christian life. And then, there's a stumbling stone. And then you're flat on the floor, not in a good way on the carpet, but like in the mud. And you're in regret. And you can't, and that's, I've seen in people's lives, and also I've experienced it myself. It's a place that is very difficult to get out of. But here's the thing with regret. It's something that can bring you to repentance and help you learn a lesson, or it's something that can climb up onto that throne and start to rule and reign, because it's condemnation. And if you stay in that place, it starts to dictate your identity. I am this because I did that. And, you know, something that God really smacked me in the face with this, because I had one particular lie that I was completely living under in my identity and had not zeroed in on it yet. And he took me to this place and was like, you know, if you continue to believe that lie, you're actually denying my sovereignty. And that was one of the biggest lessons for me, is if there's a difference between living with a regret that you learn from and pick yourself up from and grow from and hand back to God and stand up, dust yourself off, and off we go. That's a healthy regret. Then there's living under that regret and allowing it to be a dictating force in your life. That denies the sovereignty of God. Like, that says, God, you were not in control in this area. You did not know that was going to happen. And so now, therefore, this thing rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good. I think that in this area of identity, we have to call out this thing called compromise.
Yeah. Oh.
So, you know, so the great thing that comes to try and steal and rob and kill, the devil will come with an offer of compromise on your godly identity.
So good.
And when we fall into that place and fall into that temptation of that place, that is when our godly identity is robbed. And that is when our place with God, the authority of God in our life, the impact of God, the transformation of our life is robbed because we have entered into compromise. You know, an easy, simple example of this principle in the Bible would be Samson. So Samson is given a call, a clear identity through his birth, and a way of life, a consecrated way of life to live, because this is who God made him to be. And he was going to give Samson unparalleled strength, unparalleled authority to be able to deal with the enemies of Israel at the time that he was living. But Samson was human and he liked girls. And so he, instead of choosing a girl from the Israelites, from the people, from his own people, this would be like, you know, you haven't been married and you, instead of saying, I'm committed to marrying a believer only, okay, you go, you know what, I don't care. Whatever. I just want to be married. I'm going to marry a non-believer. Okay. So he goes out and he takes for himself a girl from the Philistines, and her name is Delilah. And the issue right there is this. I'm sure Delilah made him feel good. I'm sure she was beautiful. I'm sure he felt great in that relationship. And so he was allowing something to come in, you know, into his life. He was compromising with what God had said. You know, when God brought the people of Israel back to the land out of Egypt, he gives the land of Canaan to them. He tells them, don't make any treaties with any of the people. Don't marry into them. Don't take yourselves wives from these people, because they will compromise your heart. King Solomon is an awesome example of that. That's exactly what happened, right? He takes foreign wives, and eventually King Solomon, the man who God blesses beyond, you know, anything we could ever fathom or imagine today in the kingdoms of today, he ends his life in this pitiful state, far, far away from worshiping the God of Israel, the one true living God. So again, this is why God gives this edict. And so Samson disobeys. He gives into this temptation. He allows this compromise into his life. And we all know the story, how it ends, right? Samson ends up giving up the secret. He tells Delilah the secret of God's authority and strength in his life. She then, you know, gets her friends to cut off his hair, and he finds himself strung up in a temple to Dagon. I'm sure that moment when he woke up, you know, when everything came crashing down around him, the realization, you know, of this slippery slope, this frog in boiling water dynamic that had happened to his life. He probably was sitting there chained up to this millstone, you know, just, I could even hear him groaning, you know, just reliving picture after picture after picture of that slow decline and compromise that brought him to that point. And that's when he comes to repentance and he says, God, allow me this one more time, give me the strength. And that's when he collapses the idolatrous temple of the Philistines onto himself and onto them. But what that took to get there, identifying a seed of compromise, identifying the smallest place where we are coming out of full agreement with God's identity in our life and starting to agree with a piece of identity that's not God, our God-given identity, is really the key to keeping us in that place where we are walking with a pure heart before God.
Yeah.
So even just going through that exercise, that discipline, it's almost like an athlete. It's like training. The more you do it, the stronger that muscle becomes, the easier and better it will perform for you. It's the same with our spiritual discipline, prayer, fasting, worship, and this place where we allow God to examine our life. Doing that, strengthening that muscle, getting agile, better at it, means that we will catch it quicker. Yeah. I know today in my life, I'm able to catch things much faster. Yeah. I'm able to no, that's not the voice of God. Hey, that's not living in accordance with pure heart. I will catch it faster and back to sender, right? I will just kick it out of my life. Be like, you're out, get out. You have no room here. You have no business in my life. I'm the daughter of the King.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I just want to interject and say that this sounds quite heavy. These words, prayer and fasting and all these things, they can sound so heavy and not fun. And I just want to reassure people that we do actually have a lot of fun in life. So and what's awesome about God is that, he puts you in community and he puts you in a place where iron sharpens iron, and he can do that next to a fire pit just fine, and
with marshmallows.
It's not that life has to become this dragged, dreary, penance and dark kind of woe, kind of, heavy stuff. You can learn these lessons through friendship, through community, you might have these darker times or difficult moments or struggles, but you need to be in community which can hold your hand and run with you. And I think that's about finding your tribe. When you find your tribe, you find your people, they will run with you and they help you. When you train, we know this because we do CrossFit together. When you train in a group, you go further, you go harder, you're motivated for more than if you were just on your own. If I was in that group by myself with a coach, I would die after 5 minutes and give up and go home, crawl home actually. But because I'm in a group of 9 or 10 or whatever it is, people, and we're going together, you have someone to chase and you have someone to pull behind you. There's all levels, all stages, and you go together. And Sarah and I, we talk a lot with our kids about, we like to develop gang mentality in our children. We encourage that we want them to know that there are others that have their back, they're not alone. And that's the importance of community. And I was just thinking about when my husband and I, before we moved to Israel, one of the jobs that we had was overseeing a youth work across 11 different churches. And we had a team of youth workers from each of those churches that we used to mentor and train each week. And one of the most effective visual pictures that we had for teens and young adults was we put one person on a chair and we asked them to pull somebody on the ground up to the chair with them. And the first thing they did was put their hands down, look down, and try and pull people up. And what do you think is easier to do? Pull people up onto a chair, or for a group of people to pull that person off of a chair? Of course, they always fell off the chair, and it was, hilarious, falling all over each other on the floor. But what we were trying to point out to them is how the enemy is always looking for a hook into your life. And if you lower your hands and look down, he will be able to grab that. He will find a way to attach to that, and it will start to pull you down. Even if you think you're pulling them up, it will be pulling you down. So the way to pull those people up to the chair is, again, against the natural instinct. It's to actually raise your eyes up, put your hands up, and actually that's where your help comes from. That is where the solution comes from. But we so often, especially teens, you know, they're developing all these new awarenesses and skills, and identity is being formed. It's everything in them wants to hook onto everybody around them. And even if they are like strong in their faith and they want to bring their friends into it, they will reach out and they will try and hook in with their peers, not knowing the force that that peer has to pull them down. And it was such a useful picture to kind of share with those people, and it really stuck with me because I see that all the time, even in my own life now. My natural response to fixing and compromising and all of this is to run towards it and try and fix it and try and get it to match up with what I want, as opposed to putting my hands up and looking up and finding God's solution and God's point of view and God's spoken identity over that thing.
So good. I really resonate with this because I know that for me, in finding my identity, it was actually friendships, close friendships.
Yeah.
And if you don't have godly friendships in your life, I would really counsel you to pray and seek those.
Yeah.
Ask God for a few. You don't need a lot. A few, one or two key godly friendships where you can be that place of iron sharpens iron and encouragement and blessing. And, you know, for me, when this really big change happened in my life, I was at a loss. I didn't know, even though it was so, now it's so evident and apparent, but at the time I was kind of grappling around in the dark. And so if you ask the people who know you for a long time, who've known you for a very long time, good godly people that have known you, you know, they can see in your life things that you cannot see. Sometimes we're wrapped up inside. It's hard for us to see, but, you know, ask them. Say, hey, you know, if I were to say, what is my calling? What is my gifting? What are these things? They can see these gifts. They can see these things in you that you maybe cannot see, or you cannot piece them together.
Yeah.
And the people around you that are close to you, that are for you, that are godly in counsel, can really help you to understand that. You know, I really believe that understanding your identity in Christ, in Messiah, is foundational, because, you know, when you know your identity, when you know who you are in God, you know what you're saying yes to.
Yeah.
But when you know what you're saying yes to, you also know what you're saying no to.
Right.
So when you understand what your identity is, what your focus is, who you are, what your life in God is, you know what's in. You know what's a part of that. But then you also know what's out, what's not a part of that. And it gets much easier to say no to the things of the world, to say no to the ways of the thinking of the world, to say no to sin when you accept God's identity in your life. Because we were, as we've been saying in these podcasts, made in his image. So we have that godly identity to take upon ourselves. And so when we live from that perspective, when we live from an eternal perspective of our identity on earth, we can easily start to discern. And discernment is one of the most important principles, or it's not a principle, it's a skill. What is it? Discernment. It's this ability that we have. It's a spiritual gift of discernment. This ability that we have to understand what is of God and what is not of God. Even if someone that we respect, you know, and like very much, and you know, they might be saying something that is not of God. We need discernment in our life. We need the Holy Spirit to help us, the Spirit of counsel and wisdom and truth, to give us that understanding. And so when you are able to discern what is part of that godly identity and what is not, it gets easy. Chuck it out. Back to sender, right? You are not part of this, and you are not part of my focus. And, you know, the devil, when you are a believer and you've been walking for a while, he's not going to come and try to tempt you with something that is clearly, quote unquote, wrong. Let's go and rob a bank. You know, let's go and be involved in, I don't know, whatever. You know, you're obviously going to be like, no, you know, I'm not going to do that. But if he can come with something stealthily, with something small, with something that, you know, clings onto a place that in your life where you haven't examined yet, and you're like, yeah, I have a right to do that, or to feel that way, or to be in this relationship, or whatever it is, then he can easily sow these seeds of compromise into your life. And so having discernment, really, really, truly testing everything according to the word of God, everything, and having that personal, alive, and real relationship with God. Don't rely on whether the people say, yes, listen, yes, study, yes, understand. There are amazing commentaries on the Bible. Do you know? Not all of them are right. Not all of them are true. Shocking. I'm sorry to surprise you. Not all Christian theory is correct. It just isn't. It's also got its own personal viewpoints and agendas and ideas. It all
started as somebody's opinion.
Yes. And so, you know, just because it says that, you know, that name there doesn't mean that that is perfectly aligned with God's word. You need to cultivate your own real relationship with the Lord, where you hear his voice, where his Holy Spirit gives you that discernment so that you can test everything, everything and know. And so when you're looking at our own identity, your own identity in your life, test everything. Yeah. Don't make assumptions that are based on things that you've allowed in. Test everything according to God. And I tell you, this is freedom. This is freedom. It frees you up to know what's right, what's not, what's in, what's out, what I should be engaged in and what not. One of the greatest strategies the devil will come at you with is busyness. Yeah. Lots and lots of great things to do. Lots and lots of great things to be involved in. Oh, I can't have my quiet time. I'm so busy, you know, going and helping so-and-so. No.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think we're listening to what you've just said. You know, the devil is not creative. He is not a creator. He can only use what's already there. And I think so much of this ties back into the previous episode that we did on idolatry, because he will find a hook. And like what you've just said, busyness. Why is that a thing? Why do I need to be busy all the time? Probably because somewhere in the mix, I'm a people pleaser and I need other people's affirmation of me to define me and make me feel worthy or valued. And so I will consume my life with serving everybody else and running around like a headless chicken, serving everybody's needs so that I can feel appreciated. And that the enemy will use that. And it's actually a gift. Serving people is a gift, but it's been hijacked to define you. And that's where this shift comes with understanding gifts and tools rather than identity. And I think I was actually reminded, I think we both use the same picture with our kids of the city wall. I think that's a really good picture, and I actually still talk about it a lot. Like, I don't know if your kids have grown out of this yet or not, but we talk about it. Our hearts are like a city with a wall, and you have to maintain the integrity of the wall. And if you don't, you're giving a foothold, you're giving a way in for the enemy to climb over or get through. And I talk to my youngest a lot, particularly about the issue of truth and lies. And if you make a little hole in that wall, you know, the first place we interact with the enemy in the Bible is a snake in the Bible, and he's a liar. And if you have a little hole, that snake can get in, like it can slither through and start whispering lies. And that is the truth. That's the truth of what the enemy will do. He cannot create. He is not on an equal par with God. He is not a creator. He isn't creative. He may wrap something up very beautifully. That he can do, but he cannot create something from nothing. So he will only use what is there already. So if you've given him a foothold, he will use it. If you've given him a hook, if you've given him, or if there's a space in our lives that isn't fully surrendered or hasn't, like Sarah said, been investigated and examined, he can take those places and introduce little drip feeds of compromise. And compromise, I would say, always ends up with idolatry.
So good. You know, everything we've been talking about in this episode, this is really about the power of knowing your identity in God. When you have that place, your feet are set upon the rock. When your identity is in the salvation of God over your life and in living this consecrated life, nothing can move you. I will not be moved. What is that? That is somebody who knows who they are, and who knows who their God is. And so it becomes that key to living an indestructible life. And this is really what the Transformed Life podcast is about, what everything that we do on Ascend is about, how we're trying to live our lives. And hopefully just by us being honest and real and telling you some of our experiences and our stories, this can be a blessing for you and really a catalyst to start to have this conversation with God in your own life. Because ultimately anything that we say, can be great, but the most powerful thing to change and transform you is for you to hear the voice of the Lord. So we want to encourage you to communicate with God. Bring these things, anything that's been said in these episodes and any of this podcast series that sparks that place in your life. Take it to the Lord. Ask Him. Work through these places. Examine. Find out for yourself, what is God saying to you? Because God says different things to different people. We're all in a different place. We cannot judge. Don't judge a book by its cover. Well, don't judge a believer by what they look like on the outside. You don't know what's going on in the heart. And so this is really each of us coming before the Lord, doing the work, submitting and surrendering to His work in our lives that will set our feet on this place indestructible. So we would love to hear from you. If you have any comments or any ideas or anything that you'd like to hear us talk about, please email us or pop a comment in the box below and hit that next button so that you can roll on to the next episode of this podcast.
Yes, we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Make sure you're subscribed so that you never miss an episode. And if you have loved this show, please leave us a rating.
Yeah, we'd so appreciate it. And share it with your friends and your family. We are so excited that you have joined the journey.